Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to welcome Sarah Brady here tonight, who many of us from Washington have known for so long for tireless efforts on a variety of issues affecting firearms and reduction of gun violence. And I was telling Sarah that I faced this myself in 1994 when the voters of my congressional district decided to provide me with another job opportunity, involuntarily, I might add. But that was the year that President Clinton had pushed through, with congressional support, the gun legislation involving the assault weapons ban. And of course, I thought I did the right thing, and still believe I did the right thing. Clearly, the issue of firearms is one that involves a whole lot of controversy and intense feelings on all sides of the issue. But you know, what I've always found with Sarah is that in her battle on the issue, her ammunition is reason, statistics, and personal stories of tragic loss and pain. And she's gone around the country setting up a national movement to try to get people to talk about the whole issue of that thousands of Americans are affected by gun violence and what we can do about this particular problem. It's a good lesson in democracy because what she's done is served as a symbol that if you believe in something strongly, then you have to pursue it with eternal vigilance and tenacity. Sometimes I think if you look in the dictionary under the word tenacious, Sarah Brady's picture is in there because she never lets go of this particular issue. 10 years ago, the Brady bill was signed into law, and I'm proud to say that I voted for that as well. And that, of course, required a 5-day waiting period and background checks before a person could buy a firearm. And it took a long time to achieve and created a buzz throughout the country. But I really do believe that it has had a dramatic effect on reducing gun violence in this country. Sarah Brady has changed America and has emboldened and inspired us all. And thanks in large part to her efforts, the issue of firearms is very much a part of our deliberative strategy in the legislative arena and the newspaper arena and the philosophical arena, and we are much safer for her efforts. These issues involving the Second Amendment, are very divisive in America, as well as in the halls of Congress. I can speak for that personally. They are issues which are a bit ideological, but they're mixed in the political spectrum because you have Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the issue. They kind of tend to divide more in the rural-urban scenario than they do in the liberal-conservative scenario, which is a bit different from most other issues. But in that scenario, in this difficult political climate that we have in this country, one person has persevered in raising the consciousness of the American people more than anybody else, and I believe that person is Sarah Brady. And Sarah received her BA degree from the College of William and Mary, but I think we can say safely that she has a PhD in grassroots organizing and democracy building. So we're proud to welcome to the forum Sarah Brady.
Secretary Glickman, thank you. Golly, what a wonderful introduction. I also want to thank you for your many, many years of public service and for what you did in passing the Brady Law and the assault weapon ban. And as he told me, he ended up getting a better job anyway. And for what you do here. I also want to thank Bill White. Where'd you go, Bill? For your help in allowing me or inviting me here to speak. And then I just had a big surprise a moment ago, somebody who you all may or may not know, but someone else who was one of our very first co-sponsors on the Brady Law just happens to be, after many years of serving in the U.S. House, a fellow student here. And he's an old friend of mine, and I'd like to ask him to stand up because is he still here? He's coming back. I guess he'll come back, Ron Mazzoli, many years in Congress and one of our first and best supporters. You know, I spoke here, oh golly, I think it's been 15, almost 20 years ago, when I was just beginning to get my feet wet on this issue. But boy, I can remember that night, how nervous I was, knowing you were going to speak at the Kennedy School to such a prestigious forum. Some things never change. I can tell you tonight I'm scared spitless again, but very deeply honored to be here. This institute was founded to continue one of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's visions, making public service more attractive to the next generation of leadership. Most of you here are either planning to be involved in public policy and service, or you're already involved. I never had the opportunity to study public policy, but somehow found myself deeply entrenched in the politics of guns nearly 20 years ago. Times were, in a way, very much like they are today. The Republican Party had just come into power. The NRA was furious because it had lost in the late 60s because a bill called the Gun Control Act of '68 was passed. A new Republican had come in, and they had great hopes of being able to do lots of good things and pushing their agenda. And that's when I got involved. They're at it again today with a Republican president and hopes that they can get a lot done. So we have to make sure the next 10 years we stop them as we did 10 years ago, in the past. The Mcclure Volkmer bill, as I said, was the gun lobby's premier bill at the time. And it was introduced right after Ronald Reagan had become president. The '68 Gun Control Act had been passed in the aftermath of the assassinations of President Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy. And it had been the only federal law on the books, except for going back to the 30s, when there was a law that put very strong restrictions on the Thompson, the Tommy gun, and fully automatic weapons. The '68 gun control law was a beginning, but it was too much for the NRA. And they thought for sure with Reagan in, they would have an ally and would be able to win. And they used to brag that Ronald Reagan was an NRA life member. And Ronald Reagan heard that and heard that they were touting him as someone who was supportive. And he called me up and he said, "Sarah, there's something I want you to know. I never joined the NRA. They sent me one of those life cards." And that's what they do to many people, members of Congress and so forth. And so luckily, he never did enter in and help them in passing the Mcclure-Volkmer bill. And that was our first fight, was seeing the NRA pushing something which would have totally abolished the '68 Gun Control Act. They failed. The bill passed, but it had no teeth, and we were able to maintain that act. Then the NRA, which is always against anything rational, their next act, which was totally unbelievable, there was a bill to ban guns, so-called plastic guns, guns that only had, it would ban a gun unless it had a certain amount of metal in it so that it would go through a magnetometer. And the NRA opposed that. They said, no, you should make a gun out of anything you want. But of course, everybody, the airline pilots, law enforcement, anybody in their right mind understood that you had to have a certain amount of metal in that weapon to go through the magnetometers. They fought it tooth and nail, and they lost, very understandably. In fact, only 2 members of Congress voted against it. One of them was a member of Congress from Wyoming. And in lobbying for this bill, I kept calling him and calling him and calling him because he happened to be an acquaintance of my husband's and mine. They both had worked together over the years. And he would never return my phone calls. He was just missing in action. His colleague at the time was a Republican senator from Wyoming by the name of Alan Simpson, who didn't vote with us on many things, but at least he would meet with us and say, this is why I can't be with you. But not this congressman. We couldn't find him anywhere. How ironic that this elusive congressman who opposed the ban on plastic guns, one of only 2 people, is today our Vice President of the United States. And how ironic it is that that bill, when it did pass, is the one that kept for 15 years guns from hijackers and terrorists. Unfortunately, we did have 9/11, but I think it could have happened many years before had it been easier for terrorists to be able to smuggle guns into airplanes. For the last 18 months, there's been a lot of reporting on Vice President Cheney, saying that he's in an undisclosed location. The speculation is that it's due to terrorism and national security matters. I'm not so sure about it. I think he's still hiding from us. So we have to tell him, Mr. Vice President, please come out of hiding. We got the votes and we got the ban on plastic guns. The next was our movement toward the Brady Law, and this marks the 10th anniversary of the passage and signing of the Brady Law. It was a landmark piece of legislation that took over 7 years to pass. And during those years, I can't even tell you how many battles with the gun lobby we had. But despite being outspent by them and putting up with their tactics over 10 years, we won. It was a David over Goliath victory for us. But most important are the results that we're seeing today. After 10 years of background checks, the Brady Law has already prohibited more than 1 million individuals from being able to purchase guns over the counter because the background check revealed a felony conviction or other prohibition. The nation's crime rate has gone down significantly, and more importantly, the crime rate involving firearms has gone down 3 times more than even the crime rate. It's been a wonderful piece of legislation. It did exactly what it was supposed to do and intended to do, no more, no less. And scholars of the legislative process will tell you that laws that fit that category are far too rare in this country. Our opponents, the gun lobby, said that it would prevent law-abiding people from purchasing guns, which it hasn't. They said criminals don't buy guns over the counter. Well, over 1 million of them were dumb enough to try, and you can imagine how many were scared off. The gun lobby said it would lead to confiscation of guns, and to that group I say, get a life. Stop living in your dark and dreary little dream world and accept the fact that the law was a darn good idea and responsible public policy. It was followed the next year by the passage of the assault weapon ban. And that brings us to now, the dirty tactics and what we have to do today. And of course, our friends, the gun lobby, are still at it. The good news, other than what I've given you about the crime rate going down and being able to stop over 1 million people, another good thing that has happened is that gun sales have gone down, and have been going down since the 80s. They've been going down considerably, partly due to legislation, partly due to the fact, I think, that they're probably more urban and less rural areas, and also due to the fact that there have been many new lawsuits against manufacturers and dealers. In fact, their revenues are beginning to really hurt. I don't know how many of you heard, but I happened to hear over the weekend a scary thought. Smith & Wesson, in order to bring up their revenues, is going to begin marketing a line of home decor items, clothing and camping materials, in an effort to boost their sales, which is, to me, a pretty scary thought. Somehow it just doesn't conjure up home sweet home to think Smith & Wesson has designed your bedroom. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me. The gun lobby is worried, and they're strong. And what they're doing today, I think, in two areas is pretty scary. Number one is that they are really upset about the lawsuits, because they are beginning to take a toll on the manufacturers and dealers. So they have a bill in Congress, an immunity bill, which absolutely, totally gives immunity to only one industry in the whole United States, the gun industry, meaning that there can be no civil suits against gun manufacturers or gun dealers. This would wipe out, if passed, not all these lawsuits that are pending, including the lawsuits that recently have been filed by the families of the victims of the sniper in the Washington area. They have lawsuits at this time. Their suit is based on the fact that the firearm that was used by the sniper was bought out at a place in Tacoma, Washington, called Bullseye Shooter. And it had been cited many, many times for its lax policies and not reporting what they said were lost or stolen guns. And a gun from their gun store happened to land with the snipers. Obviously, if they had been doing their job, neither of which of the snipers could have purchased a gun, because one is a felon and the other was underage. So there's a lawsuit. But this immunity bill, if it does pass Congress, will wipe out those lawsuits and any others in the future. Pretty scary thought. It has already passed the U.S. House of Representatives. It's close to passage in the Senate, so it's something that we really need to work very quickly and very hard on to be sure that one industry is immune when no other industry whatsoever. I mean, there are many folks who may not like lawsuits and may feel that that's not the way to go. But that's not the issue here. This is the right of victims to be able to keep an industry responsible. Even more alarming to me personally, I think, is the fact that the NRA is currently fighting tooth and nail to be sure that the assault weapon ban is not renewed. And I think many people here, maybe here, but throughout the country, don't realize that when the assault weapon ban was passed 9 years ago, that it sunsetted, or it expires next September. And without a reauthorization or a renewal, a new bill, it will automatically expire. The House leadership has already announced that it doesn't intend to bring that up. So we need to change that. President Bush has said he will sign an assault weapon ban renewal. But the point will be now, does he take action? Does he work with his House leaders and his Senate leaders to be sure that it's brought up and to give that bill the chance it needs? He certainly, we know from the last couple of weeks, has the ability to pull in his friends and to strong-arm them about gifts to Iraq. We expect him to use that same tactic to bring up the assault weapon ban next year. If not, we're going to see Uzis, AK-47s back on our streets, street sweepers, Bushmasters, and clips that carry 50 rounds, none of which we've been seeing now for the last 10 years, thank goodness, at least not in great numbers. Now it comes to how we do what we do, because the NRA is powerful and it is hard to beat. The question I guess I get asked more than any other, and I gotta watch my time, am I getting 5 minutes? Okay. I hadn't noticed anyone shaking their watches yet. Is why is the NRA so powerful? And the best answer to that one is one that a good friend of mine, former Governor Mario Cuomo, once gave when I was doing a press conference with him, and nobody answers a question better than Mario Cuomo. He said simply when asked, those damn crummy little postcards. And you know what those little postcards, there hasn't been a member of Congress or a state legislator in the country that doesn't get little postcards from the NRA. And they get bombarded when the NRA sends out its alerts, which panic. You know, they'll say the gun grabbers are at it again. Write your congressman, write your senator. These are a very small group of people. They don't even constitute 2% of our nation. But they're powerful because they are persistent. They're single issue. They're passionate. And they're certainly not new at this game. And I'll tell one little story. In doing some research for one speech I gave quite a few years ago, I happened to notice in my husband's old textbook, government textbook, on a chapter on lobbying, that the very first example of a misuse of money that was ever registered in the U.S. Congress went back to the 1840s, and it involved Samuel Colt. And as you know, he was the inventor of the Colt special. And he actually paid his congressman, his own congressman, $2,000, which in those days, well, even today, to me, that's a lot of money, to legislate or to put through a patent extension on his revolver. And then, and one of the first big examples of good lobbying, or bad lobbying, he had parties at the Willard Hotel where he provided free booze, and he even brought in a group of what were called spiritualists. These were young ladies, the record said, to make sure the elected officials were adequately spirited toward his cause. And the congressional record indicates that these spiritualists moved with the members. I don't know what that means exactly, but it's quite a vision. And I haven't seen the NRA with any spiritualists recently, but we do know the money still flows. So they've been at this a long, long time. But guess what? We've got secret weapons, too, that are just as strong. Not spiritualists, but one of them is our Million Moms. And I hope everybody here has heard of the Million Moms. They had a march just 3 years ago. We have a group here today. Would they raise their hands? And I'm going to put Million Moms up against the spiritualist any day. Along with the moms, we have a growing group of grassroots activists, today armed with laptops rather than these crummy little postcards. And the same internet tactics that Governor Howard Dean has been using to put some sparkle on his presidential campaign have also been applied in the past year by supporters of reasonable gun laws with great results. One real fresh example, and I hope everybody will go home because I think it's a hilarious website, will go home and check out NRAblacklist.com. The website's only 2 weeks old, and it's a really good approach. The NRA keeps a blacklist of people who are supposed enemies of theirs. I certainly know how Jim, my husband, and I made the list, but we're still wondering why in the world Britney Spears did. So go home and check and see if you're on. And you also will get a chance to be on their blacklist if you want to, and I hope everybody here does vote to be on their blacklist. Other things that we're doing, last week, in the New York Times, we did an ad that raised attention to the gun immunity issue. And in today's New York Times, there's another ad drawing attention to the fact that the assault weapon ban will expire in a year and that we need their help. As we speak, right this moment, as my husband would say, in Washington, local activists are meeting at a conference in DC who represent the leadership of the grassroots efforts that we're putting together around the country. Since 1999, the volunteer activism has been fantastic. And as I said before, it was really started in part by the Million Moms. I haven't even gotten to what our agenda for the future is. Can I have one more minute to mention that? Okay. So first of all, we have to get the immunity bill out of the way. We have to make sure the assault weapon is banned. The ban is renewed. And then we need to take steps to be sure in the future that we have a boost to the Brady bill. Today, the Brady bill only covers sales over the counter by licensed gun dealers. And even the checks that are done now by an instant check system are not totally effective. They only cover, for the most part, felons. They don't normally cover misdemeanors of spousal abuse. They normally don't have on there, from most states, mental health records, people with restraining orders against them, fugitives, any of the last-minute things. A state needs to do a check. So we need to expand the Brady Law to cover every single solitary gun sale in this country, and to be sure that the very best background check possible is done, not just an instant check. And it may mean going to a waiting period, which we had before in a sunset. But if we have to take 3 days to run the perfect background check, we need to do it. And now I won't even tell my last story because I think you're antsy for me to get on to questions and answers. But maybe I'll bring it in during questions and answers. So I want to thank you again for asking me to be here. I didn't realize I was so wordy. It's been a pleasure and an honor for me, and hopefully we can get some more good stuff out during questions and answers.
Thank you. We have The audience here, and up there if you wanted. If you would state your name and where you go to school or where you represent, and try to keep your questions as brief as you possibly can. But I'm going to take the prerogative to ask the first question, because in some sense I was a target of the NRA in 1994, and I know I have lived through the politics of this. And here's what I would ask you, Sarah, as a congressman, as you said. The folks who favor no change in firearms laws or rolling back have a great amount of intensity. And even though it's 2%, in a lot of states and districts, it's 5%. And it's not the money so much, it's just this extraordinary organization and intensity. And you know that if you don't go with them, they will do everything within their power to defeat you. Everything. So in politics, if the intensity is not on the other side, you're going to go down most of the time the path of least resistance. So I would ask you, what are you doing to get the intensity up on the other side? So fear is a big thing in politics, more than hope is when it comes to voting. What are you going to do to put the fear and wrath of Sarah Brady and her army in the minds and hearts of members of Congress so there is a relative parity of respective positions on these issues? Because if you don't do that, you will not be successful in any of your agenda. That's my belief.
And you know what? I expect if I had to face any question under the sun, that's the hardest darn question. And it is hard because, as I said, 90% of the American public, 90 more, are with us and with the members who vote with us. And how do we, the only way to do it is to be sure this grassroots movement this time around is stronger and better and more continuous and constantly working. I think what happened after Brady and after assault weapons, and it's a lesson I think we've all learned, the whole country kind of sat back and was content. We've passed two major pieces of legislation. Everything's going to go away. And our grassroots folks kind of went by the wayside. We didn't keep up the drumbeat. We weren't able to convince people to vote that issue after it already passed. And that is something now with our new grassroots effort that has to be our number one priority, is to be sure that you thank the people who voted your way, that you show them that you're going to be with them constantly. I don't always agree, and I will take issue with this. I know many members of Congress are very, very nervous, but it isn't really the gun.
I'm not nervous any longer.
It isn't really the gun issue that defeats you by any means. In fact, most times when you bring up the gun issue, the people will be with you. But it's the other things they say about you and the amount of hammering away that they can do. Now, you were from a tough state. You had a tough district. But many, many members of Congress have been elected when they kept the drumbeat going and didn't shy away from it. Not that you ever shied away. But, that we had a hard year in '94, and I don't in any way think the gun issue was responsible for it. There were a lot of things responsible for it.
Okay. Let's start with this gentleman here, and then we'll go over here, and then keep going. Yes.
My name's Richard Coe. I'm class of '82. I was a junior at Harvard when John Lennon was murdered and when the press secretary was brain damaged. What I wanted to ask you was, in your over 20-year efforts at battling the National Rifle Association, have you found an irreconcilable conflict between gun control, the Second Amendment of the Constitution, namely the right to bear arms, and the free enterprise, namely the profit motive of both international and United States gun manufacturers?
The financial, what was the last part?
The profit motive of, like, say, Winchester Repeating Arms in New Haven, Connecticut, the right to bear arms, which the NRA claims is their right, and something I'm sure is near and dear to the Kennedy School, which is the fact that the former president and senator from New York were murdered by firearms.
On the Second Amendment, first of all, we know every court decision that has ever come down to the state and hasn't gone to the Supreme Court says it is an individual's right to keep and bear, that it is the state's right to bear arms against the federal government, not an individual's right. I like to keep that out of the conversation because it makes no difference. We have and don't advocate taking anyone's gun away. No gun has been taken away. All we advocate is taking every measure we can to be sure the guns don't land in the wrong hands, and to perhaps regulate the type of weaponry. We do not sell nuclear bombs on the open market or grenade launchers. So there can be regulation without taking away the ability, or as they like to call it, the right, to purchase firearms. So it's an argument they use. I think it holds no water whatsoever, because the courts have certainly never ruled in that direction.
Hi, my name is Lindy Miller, and I'm a student at the Kennedy School now. We've studied a little bit in one of my classes the tobacco sequencing of legislation and court decisions and what have you. And in some ways, I see the tobacco issue as a much more difficult issue considering the percent, say, of Americans who might be with the tobacco industry or smokers or what have you. And although I think the two situations are very different, I see some similarities between both struggles. And what I'd like to know from you is, what do you think that the anti-gun proponents can learn from sort of the anti-tobacco industry proponents based on what's happened during the 90s? And also, in addition to that, how do you see like public service announcements like the anti-smoking ads that are shown on TV that have been effective in Massachusetts? Do you see anti-gun advertisements as playing a similar role?
Well, that's a good. And you probably are better at this than I am, not being an attorney, but and I have not having been a student during the time the smoking legislation has been going through. But of course, it's been quite effective. And we've done very much the same thing. We have lawsuits. We have a legal action division and have had now for many years. In the beginning, it was mainly done, we mainly took on suits which were definitely negligence suits or that type of thing. But that's what now in the last 5 years, that's been a good part of our energy is taking on suits. We have the California 101 suit, and they are very much alike, that and the smoking legislation. I think in many ways, immunity in this area is much scarier than you can imagine. I mean, when you go to sue a negligent gun dealer or sue a negligent manufacturer, that isn't something which somebody voluntarily has done. Whereas in the smoking, I find that a little shakier. And I have to admit, I have been a smoker all my life, and I have lung cancer. But I can tell you the last thing on earth that I could do would be to sue the smoking. I know from the moment I started smoking as a 16-year-old, my father in the old days would call them cancer sticks. But that's far different to me and I'm not proud of any of this, but I want to make the analogy, that's far different than a gun dealer who doesn't run background checks or purposely sells guns incorrectly. The lawsuit needs to be there to we need to keep every industry responsible. The smoking industry has been I agree with the wrong way they've marketed and the deceptions, and the gun industry is the same way.
And the public service announcement?
Public service announcements. Do you-
Public service announcement. That's something we have done some in gun safety over the years. And I think probably we'll do more and more of those in the future. We need money to do all these kind of things, though. Unlike the gun lobby, we're not well funded. That's why I need you all to go to stopthenra.com. Let's help fund some of these things that are so needed. It's a you need a faceted approach we've got to have. You got to hit them prevention, laws, lawsuits, the whole area, and only that way are we are really going to be able to cut down on the violence.
I just want to make the I think your question's an interesting question. The one big difference is that only in 6 states do we produce tobacco, so the politics of tobacco is considerably different than the gun issue, where you have gun owners, gun dealers, and NRA members in 50 states, and they're effective force in all 50 states, whereas the tobacco industry, if it had any political strength, it was limited to a small number of states.
And taxes, tax revenue.
And tax revenues to some extent, but that issue is still not as powerful of an issue politically. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, good evening. My name is Josh White. I'm from the Harvard Business School. You mentioned the background checks on domestic abuse, domestic violence issues, and I was wondering if you could comment on any other initiatives that you're working on, or any type of studies that you've done to perhaps reduce or at least educate people on the issue of domestic violence and handguns and whatnot.
Well, of course, we continually try to educate them. One of the things we work on is to try and get more funding so that more states can upgrade their records. Because I don't think the American public even realizes that what goes into the National Instant Check System is only as good as what the states provide them. And some states are very, very good. Massachusetts, I'm sure, is right up to date. And if they're good state laws, we're in good shape. But we have to constantly keep working on that funding to be sure that states will do it. It costs money, and in this day and age, states are hurting, and they don't have the money to be able to do this, which is why I believe until that system is working perfectly, we have to have a waiting period to give not only the NCI, which is the National Instant Check System, a chance, but then every state can go do their own individual check. It is illegal for anybody who's been found guilty of a misdemeanor because of spousal abuse to purchase a gun. And to not have that on a system is pretty scary.
Yes, sir. There.
I have a communication question.
Can you state your name and where you school or anything like that?
Right, sorry. My name's Josh Good
Yeah.
from Harvard Divinity School.
Yeah.
And I have a communication question about speaking out of struggle or leading out of struggle. David Gergen has this crucible thesis that often the best leaders are born in times of adversity, and sort of working through that adversity comes their strength. And I'd like to ask if, sort of because of the difficult experience that you had in your own life, if there have been any talking techniques that you could share with sort of communicating the gravity of the experience and the concerns that it raises with others who haven't experienced those same things, particularly thinking of how that might relate to even, President Bush today in other countries or something like that.
You all have the best, deepest questions. This is the tougher group you all are way above me. I do real well out in the grassroots. And Dave Gergen is a good friend of ours. And I wish I had, you can probably tell I'm not a very good communicator. I kind of talk off the top of my head a lot, but certainly when any of us go through an adversity, and then have, in my case, because my husband was well known, and for anybody who was a communicator, he was very popular, I was fortunate enough to have a forum from which I could speak. And it has helped, I think, bring the issue to the fore. techniques. I know for years, I didn't do it tonight because it's so old hat anymore and because this isn't a really good forum for it. But normally when I went out to talk about the gun issue in the early days, I went out and spoke as the wife of a victim and what life was like, and met with victims from all over the country. Because until you've ever been victimized like that and have any idea what it's like to live with somebody, in my case, my husband, he'd been White House press secretary a little over 90 days. He was extremely popular. He had the job of his lifetime. We had a 2-year-old. And on March 30th of that year, Jim went upstairs at 5 in the morning to get Scott out of his crib and to say goodbye before he went to work. And that afternoon, our life changed as dramatically as anything ever could. The future that Jim had, the ability to be able to walk up the stairs and to pick his son out of a crib and play with him again was over. And yes, those are, when you tell powerful stories like that to people all over the country, it does bring it home. David's a smart man. Is he working with you over there at the Divinity School? He's an old friend. Ask him about the time he took our son on an elephant ride.
Okay. Let's see, this gentleman right here, and then you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Brush, and I'm a writer from Rockport, which is about 40 miles north of here. Mrs. Brady, first of all, I just want to say that I have the deepest admiration and respect for the work you've done the last 20 years.
Thank you.
And I want to ask a question, and I'll tell a very brief story. The question is, why don't we write some more postcards? And the reason I'm saying that is that about 3.5 years ago, after the first grader was killed in Flint, Michigan, I left Boston, I left the Catholic Worker House and moved back to Rockport, where I used to live, and decided I'd spend 2 months doing something for gun safety. And I began writing postcards for gun safety, and I've spent the last 3.5 years writing postcards for gun safety in the town I live in the state, throughout the country, and outside of the country to writers and others. In the process, I was charged with criminal harassment, and I was banned from the Rockport Public Library, the Rockport Art Association, and the Toad Hall bookstore by a stay-away order. And last year I was placed on trial, and fortunately I had a hung jury. And as I stand here, there's 5 people I can't write to in the country and the world, and I'm continuing to write postcards. So my question to you is, why don't we send some more postcards for gun safety, particularly for the children in the schools of the United States, and for everyone. Thank you.
Well, certainly we need, and when I spoke of crummy little postcards, I was talking about the crummy little postcards that the opposition sent. Certainly postcards from us, for anybody who isn't doing internet, we need. The more you can support your congressman and keep that support going, the more we can fight for the safety of the kids, for all our safety. We still lose over 25,000 people in this country a year. That's abominable. I mean, that's a war. We are a war zone, and we don't even think about it. I mean, I'm so sorry you lost. I don't think it was the gun issue, but thank God you had the guts to do it. And we hope that people like you keep getting elected, and we got to keep out.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Goldschmidt, and I'm a student here at the college. My question is, if you could dictate gun policy for this country, if you didn't have to make laws through Congress, if you could decide what our gun policy was, how far would you go? Would you ban the sale of guns to any private citizen, or would you somehow extend the Brady bill?
I would not ban, I don't believe, no, not at all. I would make sure that there was never a gun sold to anybody unless they'd had the most thorough background check possible, unless they had gone through a rigorous course of safety training, and that they were qualified. And before that, nobody. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that you could buy the world's most dangerous, an object that's meant to kill without knowing how to use it. But we don't require safety training in most states in this country. So it's certainly the most vigorous background check possible, plus safety training. That's at the minimum. I do think there are requirements and things we ought to do to regulate the manufacture of guns, to make sure that that we're not just doing duplicates of the assault weapons. As I said, there has to be a standard of some kind. Guns in this country can be, I mean, hunting, if they're legitimate hunting guns, or if they're the kind of weapon which some people feel is necessary to defend their home, fine. I don't happen to think a gun in the home is the way to defend yourself. I personally am against it, but I wouldn't, if given the opportunity, take away that ability for somebody who wants it, but I certainly would want to get them educated on how to use it so they don't shoot their own child sneaking in late at night thinking it's a burglar.
Yes, sir.
Hi, excuse me, my name's Mark Solomon. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. First, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. It's really been tremendous.
Thank you.
We wouldn't be where we are without you. My question is sort of a general question. Having traversed the country for such, for this period of time working on this issue, what conclusions have you come to about why this country is as violent as it is? And, and what, I guess, secondly, what drives people who are really passionate about guns?
The thing I think is that I have found, and I've learned this even more since we've left Washington, left the Beltway and moved to a more rural area. I mean, our country, when you think about it, is so young. We are, 300 and some years old? We are such a young country. Anybody who travels overseas knows that you go over there and things that aren't even antiques are 1,000 years old. And you come here and, we've been around so little. And the folks who settled our country came from other countries with that spirit of pioneer, and we want to get away from the laws and the lack of religious freedom that we had over there. And they came as an escape over here in many ways. That's kind of a horrible way. We think of them as heroes, and they are, but in many ways, they were looking for newfound freedoms of all kinds. And we began to pass laws on the East Coast and settle, they kept going west and west and west, and they got out to California, and there's no place else to go. And the more people, the more laws we passed, and there's just a huge group of people who still feel like, hey, you know what, we got too many laws. Why can't we live just completely? And the gun is the very last vestige of freedom for so many of them. They still have that pioneer spirit, and we just have to round that up, or what is the word I'm thinking of? You know what I mean, corral it and get it in the right direction. It's not awful to have public discourse on all these things if we can just put it in the right direction.
Can I just, it's your forum, but can I just mention one thing? When I was campaigning the last time, and I had voted for these laws, and I was campaigning in my base, the blue-collar base of Wichita, Kansas, the machinist union base, the Democratic base, but they were blue-collar workers, and you read bumper stickers. If you're a good politician, the first thing you do is you go into somebody's house. You see what that bumper sticker is. And, if it says I'm for the NRA, you don't come in and say I'm a great friend of Sarah Brady's. You kind of use your judgment, even though I am. But I'll never forget, I went to somebody's house, and guy was somebody I knew, and he said, Mr. Glickman, you've done a great job. I just can't vote for you. You're trying to take my gun away. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to put some reasonable rules on it, try to explain. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, you're a man who've achieved wealth and status, and you have all things. You can go on vacations, you have cars, you send your kids to college. I'm a blue-collar worker. I don't have much. What I do have is my gun. It's part of my life, and you're trying to take it away from me. And you know what? It's very hard to argue with that. That's a cultural phenomenon that's out there. You can say, well, but you don't need assault weapons, or you should have, and we're right. And probably if we sat down together and talked about it in great detail, he might agree with you, and he might agree with me. But he felt that, like, there I was, some sort of an elitist person who knows better for him than he does. And he says, I don't misuse guns, and you want to come in and change my life, and that's not right. And that I think is part of the ethic that's out there. And those of us who feel there needs to be reasonable gun regulation has to understand that. Because it's too easy to just say, don't these people understand that all we're trying to do is A, B, and C? Well, the fact of the matter is they're talking a different language than we're talking. And that, I'm sorry to add that.
But no, that he's exactly right. And it's more apparent with the assault weapon ban. I think certainly, I mean, with the Brady Law,
People kind of understand it.
people totally understood that. But when you start banning a class of weapons, then that fear really comes in. You're taking these away today. What are you going to do tomorrow? And that, I mean, it is a hard argument because you've got to convince them that the only reason that you're talking about this particular class of weapon is no legitimate person needs it. But it takes continual talking. These are the same people that I'm living with now. I listen, boy, you'll die at this. I have listened for the last 10 years every afternoon to Rush Limbaugh. Nobody drew me further from being a so-called conservative years ago than Rush Limbaugh. I can tell you that, but I love to listen to him just so I know what they're thinking. Then I listen to Dr. Lara. And of course, then we have our local. And so I'm fully entrenched in how these people really feel and believe. But they are decent, good, wonderful people for the most part. We're not talking about the 2% of total extremists. These are decent people. And all we have to do is keep the voice reasonable. No. You may still have your gun. You just be responsible with it. And they believe as much as anybody in personal responsibility.
Let's take the last question right here. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ryan Robertson. I'm a student at the Ed School, and I couldn't have asked for a more perfect lead up to my question. I'm the son of a blue-collar worker, grew up in the inner city of Detroit, which has a history of violence, and I'm a gun owner. I don't own a gun in the state of Massachusetts because of Massachusetts gun laws, which I respect. And my question is, what scares me is that the NRA seems to have monopolized the political position of gun owners, and those people do not represent my views or the views of any of the people in my community, many of whom are gun owners. So my question is, how do people who do the work that you do, which I wholeheartedly support, how do we reframe the conversation so that we can communicate to people that what you aim to do is not to take away their right to bear arms, but that I've been deer hunting many times in my life. I have never used an AR-15. And how do we make people understand that there are degrees of being able to be reasonable within what we're all kind of searching for the same thing, which is to provide a safe world.
And that's the best, it's one we just have to keep working on. For me, I think it's always been a little easier because I've been a sympathetic figure because of my husband. I grew up in the Republican Party. So when I, over the years, would go out and talk to a group of people in Kansas, they could relate to me a little bit more than they could a politician from Washington or somebody they thought was a lib or a gun grabber, because but this is what they think, these people. And we have to constantly be cognizant of that people, we don't want to put labels on any of us. we all have to make decisions on every issue differently. And I mean, we all have to fight that. I do it. I mean, I spoke about Rush Limbaugh as though he were a particular type. And I think he is. But we have to fight those kind of things, and we have to appeal to the middle. We'll never win this issue. We'll never reduce gun violence sufficiently in this country unless we make it a bipartisan, open issue where everybody, it's common sense and everybody can agree on it. And bringing out exactly what you said is the only way we're going to win. We just have to keep working at it. And you keep speaking out. Okay?
Well, Sarah, you've done a great job tonight. This has been a wonderful evening.
These are the smartest kids. They scare me.
Oh, anyway, let's hear it for Sarah.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I mean, I gotta,
love it. I
because,
love
you
it.
know, whatever, you know, listen, unfortunately, I've lived it.
I
So
know.
if you live it, then you can,
But you know,
join-
that's so good because
yeah.
that was wonderful.
By the way, you ought to take one of these, the students do
Oh,
this. And it's a
yes.
little bit, you know, just for your,
I've seen it. And
yeah,
oh,
yeah, take one for your records there, so.
Oh, yeah.